The immense, echoing silence of the Wyoming high country was a balm Corbin Hayes applied to wounds he could not name, a raw poultice for a festering spirit. It was 1874, and the Civil War was nearly a decade gone, a closed chapter in the nation's ledgers, but a ghost that still walked beside him in the thin, cold air, its breath forever on his neck. His cabin, a squat and powerful structure of hewn logs chinked with mud and moss, stood a short walk from the shores of Whispering Serpent Lake, its back pressed against a formidable stand of unyielding pines as if seeking their strength. He had built it himself, every notch and joint a testament to his desire for separation, a fortress against memory, against the world of men that had chewed him up and spat him out. He was a tall man, made lean and sinewy by relentless work and spare meals. His face, weathered by a decade of high-altitude sun and wind, was a topographical map of past hardships, with lines etched deep around eyes the color of a stormy sky. His hands were broad, calloused, and immensely capable, as comfortable with the heft of a splitting axe as they had once been with the cold, deadly weight of a rifle. He worked as a ranch hand for a cattleman named McCoy, whose spread was a half-day's ride away, a simple arrangement that provided him with paying supplies and, more importantly, the unspoken right to be left utterly alone. Town was a place he avoided with a visceral aversion. Blackwater Gulch was a raw, muddy settlement filled with the clamor of commerce and the suffocating weight of judgment. He saw in the faces of its townsfolk the same blind, fervent certainty that had sent an entire generation of boys, his own younger brother Thomas among them, marching proudly into the meat grinder of war. The phantom thunder of cannon still echoed in his quietest moments, a dull roar beneath the whisper of the pines, so he kept to his cabin, to the company of the vast, indifferent lake and the unsparing mountains that asked nothing of him. That spring had been a bitter and protracted one. A late, heavy snow in May had blanketed the high peaks in a shroud of white, and now, under the relentless sun of early June, the melt came with a furious, destructive speed. The feeder creeks that nourished Whispering Serpent Lake had become raging torrents, turning its usually placid, clear surface into a churning, slate-gray beast. Its roar was a constant, menacing presence, a sound that vibrated in the floorboards of his cabin and in the bones of his chest. He was checking the shoes on his stoic buckskin horse near the small corral when he heard it, a sound that did not belong to the symphony of the wilderness. It was human. A thin, desperate shriek, swallowed almost immediately by the lake's growl, followed by another, and then a third, a chord of pure terror. Corbin froze, his head cocked, the farrier's file held motionless in his hand. For a moment, he thought he had imagined it. Another phantom from a past filled with the cries of dying men. Then the screams came again, fainter this time as the wind shifted, but unmistakable in their frantic, human pitch. His body moved before his mind had fully consented, a deep, ingrained instinct overriding years of practiced solitude. He dropped the file in the dirt and broke into a dead run toward the lake shore, his eyes scanning the violent, choppy water. And then he saw them, a flash of dark fabric and pale skin, not one figure, but three, tangled together in the skeletal branches of a great pine that had fallen into the lake, its roots ripped from the sodden earth. They were caught in its limbs, three fragile anchors in a world of violent motion, the waves crashing over them with brutal indifference. He did not hesitate. He kicked off his heavy, mud-caked boots, unbuckled the worn leather of his gun belt and let it fall to the ground, and plunged into the icy water. The shock of the cold was a physical blow, a fist to the chest that stole his breath. The undertow was a living thing, a powerful, unseen muscle that grabbed at his legs, trying to pull him down and away. He fought it, his arms churning in a powerful crawl, his eyes locked on the women. As he drew closer, battling the waves that tried to throw him back, he could see they were identical. Three young Chinese women, their long, dark hair plastered like ink to their pale, terrified faces. One had her arm hooked desperately around a thick, sturdy branch, while the other two clung to her and to each other. One of them seemed barely conscious, her head lolling with the motion of the water, her face slack with exhaustion. He reached the fallen pine, gasping for air, the frigid water burning his lungs. "Hold on," he yelled over the roar, his voice raw. He grabbed a sturdy limb, anchoring himself against the surge, and reached for them. He could see now that the leg of the barely conscious sister was wedged cruelly between two thick branches just below the waterline, trapping them all. He took a deep, ragged breath, submerged himself in the numbing cold, and worked blindly with his hands, his fingers clumsy and stiff. He felt the rough bark, the unforgiving wood, and the fragile limb caught between them. His lungs burned, screaming for air, black spots dancing in his vision. Finally, with a great, desperate heave, he wrenched the branches apart enough to free her. She went limp immediately, a dead weight in the turbulent water. Using the last dregs of his strength, he pulled them all away from the snag, one arm hooked around the conscious sister, his other hand gripping the fabric of the other two's dresses. He began the brutal, agonizing fight back to shore. He half dragged, half carried them out of the water and collapsed on the muddy bank, his chest heaving, his body racked with violent shivers. He rolled onto his side and pressed his cold, trembling fingers to their necks, one after another. He felt pulses, faint and thready, but they were there. One of them coughed, a racking, painful sound, and a stream of lake water trickled from her mouth. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing dark, almond-shaped eyes wide with a primal, animal fear. "Easy now," he said, his voice a rough rasp. "You're safe." The other conscious sister stirred, her eyes opening as well. They clung to each other, a trinity of terror, trembling so violently their teeth chattered audibly. Their simple cotton dresses were in tatters, offering no protection from the biting wind. Where are we?" one of them whispered, the words barely audible. "My land." "Near Whispering Serpent Lake," he said, pushing himself to his feet, his own body shaking uncontrollably. "You need to get warm." "My cabin is close." He reached a hand down to help them. They flinched away from his touch, scrambling backward in the mud like a trio of startled fawns. "No," one said, her voice shaking but firm. "Do not take us to town, please." Her plea was so filled with a profound and absolute dread that it stopped him cold. "I'm not taking you to town," he said gruffly, trying to keep the impatience from his voice. "But you'll die of cold out here. The cabin is your only choice." They watched him for a long, agonizing moment, their dark, intelligent eyes searching his face, weighing one unknown danger against another, more immediate one. Finally, with a barely perceptible, synchronized nod, they relented. They tried to stand, but their legs gave way, buckling under them. Without a word, Corbin scooped one of them into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, a bird-bone fragility that felt alien against his own solid frame. She went stiff with fear at his touch but did not fight him. He carried her to the cabin, the wind whipping at them, then returned for her sisters, a mirror image of the first rescue, and then a third. He pushed the heavy cabin door open with his shoulder and carried the last woman inside, the small one-room space seeming to shrink around them. It was spare and orderly, a stone fireplace dominating one wall, a narrow cot, a rough-sawn table, and two simple chairs. But it was the scent of the place, wood smoke, coffee, leather, and solitude, that seemed to unnerve them the most. They were an intrusion into a sealed world, and all four of them knew it. He set the last sister down in the chair closest to the hearth. "Get those wet things off," he ordered, his back already turned as he knelt to add more wood to the fire, coaxing the embers back to life. It was a command born of blunt practicality, not cruelty. He did not look at them, giving them what little privacy the small room allowed. The silence was thick, broken only by the crackle of the growing flames and the sound of their chattering teeth. He felt a flash of deep irritation. He had not asked for this, for three half-drowned women with fear in their eyes to detonate the quiet, predictable rhythm of his life. Yet, as he listened to the soft rustle of wet fabric being peeled from skin, a different feeling stirred in him, something akin to a reluctant, dangerous curiosity. Who were they, and what in God's name were they running from that was worse than a storm-tossed lake in the high country? He finally allowed himself to look over his shoulder. They were huddled together in his spare woolen blanket, their wet clothes draped over the other chair near the fire. Their dark hair was a tangled mess, and bruises were already beginning to purple on their pale skin. For the first time, he could see them clearly. They were not just similar, they were perfect reflections of one another, three faces cast from a single, delicate mold. "My name is Corbin Hayes," he said, his voice low, breaking the tense silence. One of them looked up, her dark eyes meeting his for the first time without immediate, flinching fear. "I am Mai," she whispered, her voice as soft as moth's wings. Her sister, huddled beside her, added, "I am Lian." The third, who seemed the most fragile, spoke last. "And I am Xiao." They sat that way for a long time, sipping the hot, bitter coffee he brewed and gave to them in tin cups. He watched them from his place by the fire and saw the way they flinched in unison when a log popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. They were wound as tight as clock springs, burdened with secrets that radiated from them like a chill. As dusk settled over the valley, casting long shadows into the cabin, an awkward and unavoidable tension fell between them. There was only one cot. "You take the bed," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll sleep by the fire." They nodded, their eyes downcast, their gratitude and fear warring in their expressions. He laid out his bedroll on the rough plank floor, keeping his back to them as he settled down. He was acutely, uncomfortably aware of their every movement, the soft rustle as they moved to the cot, the whisper of their voices in a language he didn't understand. He stared into the dying embers, willing sleep to come, but his mind was agitated, roiled by their presence. The cabin felt impossibly small, the air charged with a strange, unwelcome intimacy. He had built this place to be empty, and now it was full to bursting. He heard one of them move behind him, the soft pad of bare feet on the wooden floor. Her voice came out of the darkness, a trembling whisper. "Mr. Hayes." He did not move, did not turn his head. "What is it?" There was a long, heavy pause. He could hear the unsteady, shallow rhythm of their breathing. "Sir," another voice came, this one belonging to Xiao, even quieter than the first. "Do you want to look at us?" The question hit him like a stray bullet, stunning the air from his lungs. He remained frozen, his back to them, every muscle in his body tense. Then Mai's voice, the quietest of all, joined her sister's, delivering the final, devastating blow. "Will you stay if we undress?" In those words, he heard the echo of 100 sordid transactions he could only imagine. He heard the shame, the resignation, the awful, hollow bartering of women who had been stripped of everything, with nothing left to sell but their own bodies. They were offering him a payment for their rescue, for the coffee, for the shelter of his roof. A hot, unfamiliar shame washed over him, mingled with a surge of pure, unadulterated anger, at them, at the men who had driven them to this, at a world that could break people down to such a desperate point. He turned his head just enough to see their silhouette in the dim firelight. They stood together by the cot, clutching the single blanket around them, a single, fragile shape in the vast, consuming darkness of the cabin. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his body fully away from them, presenting them with nothing but his rigid, unmoving back. He stared hard into the glowing coals, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. "Get some sleep," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp, thick with emotions he couldn't name. "No one is going to bother you here." He did not hear them move for a long time. When they finally did, it was the quiet sound of the cot ropes creaking under their combined weight, followed by a soft, choked sob that one of them tried and failed to stifle in the darkness. Corbin Hayes lay on the hard floor, listening to the sound of their weeping and the unabated roar of the lake, feeling the first, hairline crack spread across the frozen walls he had so carefully built around his heart. The night's raw, terrible confession hung in the air between them, a poison and a prayer, long after the fire had died to grey ash. The swollen lake and washed-out trails made travel impossible for the better part of a week, trapping the four of them in a world no bigger than Corbin's small plot of land. The sisters, it turned out, were not women who could abide idleness. A strange, unspoken rhythm soon developed between them. They cooked and cleaned with a quiet, startling efficiency, transforming his Spartan bachelor's cabin into a place of surprising order and warmth. Their hands were always busy, mending his worn shirts with tiny, perfect stitches, tending the fire, or preparing meals from his simple stores that were far more flavorful than anything he ever made himself. They spoke to each other constantly in low, rapid Chinese, a language that was as foreign and mysterious to him as their past. Little by little, in fragmented, hesitant English, their story emerged. It was a common enough tragedy in the West, yet felt unique and horrifying in its particulars. Their father had come from across the ocean to work on the Transcontinental Railroad, a man chasing a dream of gold mountains and a better life for his family. He had died in a rock slide a month ago, leaving them orphaned and, they discovered, deeply in debt to the cruel and predatory camp foreman, a man named Gideon Croft. Croft had claimed that their father's debt now belonged to him, along with all his meager possessions, including, he made chillingly clear, his daughters. They were property to be collected, an asset to be used as he saw fit. They had packed what little they owned, a few sentimental trinkets and some spare clothes, and fled in the dead of night, hoping to reach a larger town and disappear. They had tried to cross a narrow, northern arm of the lake in a stolen rowboat, only to be caught by the sudden, violent storm. Corbin listened, his face a granite mask, his stormy eyes fixed on the fire. He knew the kind of men who ran labor camps. He understood the casual cruelty, the utter lack of law or mercy that prevailed in such places, far from the eyes of civilization. As they spoke of their fear, of the leering way Croft had looked at them, he found himself speaking of his own. He told them of the war, a subject he hadn't broached with another living soul in almost 10 years. He told them of his brother, Thomas, a boy with a bright, easy smile, who had died of dysentery in a filthy camp in Virginia without ever seeing a real battle. He told them how he'd come back to a home that no longer felt like his, to a future that had vanished. He told them how he'd come west to lose himself in the vast, uncaring wilderness. Their confessions hung in the quiet air of the cabin, a bridge of shared ruin built between them. For the first time, Leanne, and Xiao looked at him not as a savior or a potential threat, but as a man who understood the universal language of grief. Their companionship became a thing of quiet spaces and unspoken understanding. A silent language grew between them in the way he began leaving a bucket of fresh, clean water for them by the door each morning, and the way they always left a hot cup of coffee for him on the hearth before he woke. For the first time since the war, Corbin felt the sharp, jagged edges of his solitude begin to soften and wear smooth. Their presence was a low, steady warmth against the persistent chill of his memories. But with this growing comfort came an unwelcome and dangerous attention. One hot afternoon, he returned to the cabin from checking a fence line and saw them down at the lake's edge, the water now calm and clear. They were washing their long, black hair, the sunlight filtering through the cottonwoods, dappling their skin. It was a simple, innocent act, but watching the three identical figures, their graceful movements, the way the water sluiced over their shoulders, Corbin felt a powerful, visceral jolt of desire. It was so sharp and unexpected that he turned away abruptly, his heart hammering against his ribs, deeply ashamed of the thoughts that had risen so easily and unbidden. They were survivors. He had sworn to protect them. They were not for him to want. The outside world intruded on the fourth day. From his porch, Corbin saw a rider coming from a long way off, a dark speck moving slowly along the trail from the direction of Blackwater Gulch. A flicker of shared panic crossed the sisters' faces. "Who is that?" Mai asked, her hand instinctively going to Leanne's arm. "Just a hand from the ranch, likely," Corbin said, his voice more confident than he felt. "He won't bother you." But as the rider drew closer, Corbin's gut tightened into a cold knot. It wasn't one of McCoy's ranch hands. It was a stout, hard-faced man he didn't recognize, and he was followed by 2 others. "Croft," Xiao whispered, the name a puff of icy air. The sisters saw him, too, and all the color drained from their faces. They scrambled back into the cabin like mice darting from the shadow of a hawk. Gideon Croft and his men reined in their horses a few yards from the cabin, their expressions a vile mixture of arrogance and menace. "Well, well," Croft called out, his eyes sweeping over the small homestead with a proprietary air. "Looks like my property has wandered off." He dismounted, his movements slow and deliberate, designed to intimidate. "I've come for what's mine, Hayes. The girls, and the debt they owe me." "They don't owe you anything," Corbin said, his voice dangerously calm. He stood on the small porch, a solid, immovable wall between them and the cabin door. His gun was not drawn, but his hand hovered near its hilt, a familiar and comforting weight. "Stay out of this, Yankee," one of Croft's men growled, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "This is our business." "They're my business now," Corbin stated, the words as final as a gravestone. Croft spat a curse and lunged for the cabin door. Corbin moved with the speed of a striking snake. He shoved Croft back hard with one hand and drew his Colt pistol with the other in a single fluid motion. But he had underestimated them, focusing only on the leader. The second hired man was already moving, not with a gun, but with a long, wicked-looking knife. As Corbin turned, the man rushed him, the blade a silver arc in the afternoon sun. Corbin parried the first thrust, the steel scraping with a shriek against his gun barrel. He brought the heavy pistol down in a brutal arc, catching the man on the side of the head. The man staggered, blood streaming from his temple, but he was tough. He came back, jabbing low. Corbin felt a sudden, white-hot fire in his left side. He grunted in pain and surprise as the blade sank into his ribs. He stumbled back against the cabin wall, a dark, wet stain already spreading across his shirt. "My, Liane," Unshio screamed from inside the cabin. The world seemed to slow, sounds becoming muffled and distant. Liane saw Corbin stagger, his face contorting in pain. She saw Croft smile, a cruel, triumphant smirk. In that moment, something inside her snapped. The fear, the grief, the years of helplessness, they burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, unadulterated rage. The heavy iron skillet she'd been cleaning sat on the hearth. Without thinking, she grabbed it. As the man who had stabbed Corbin turned toward the now undefended door, Liane burst out, swinging the skillet with all her might. The heavy cast iron connected with the man's head with a sickening crack. He crumpled to the ground without a sound. Everything froze. Croft and his remaining man stared, stunned, at the small woman holding the skillet, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing. In that frozen moment, Corbin, despite the searing pain in his side, pushed himself off the wall. He raised his pistol, not at Croft, but at the ground near his feet. The shot kicked up a spray of dirt that made Croft yelp and jump back. "Get out of here," Corbin growled, his voice strained but full of deadly menace. "And if you ever come back, I'll bury you on this land." Croft looked from Corbin's smoking gun to the unconscious man on the ground, and then to the three women standing together on the porch, one with a skillet, the other two with eyes blazing with a defiance he hadn't thought them capable of. The odds had changed. He cursed, grabbed the reins of his man's horse, and rode away, leaving his wounded companion in the dust without a backward glance. The weeks that followed were a blur of pain, fever, and healing. The doctor from Blackwater Gulch, summoned by one of McCoy's hands Corbin had managed to send for, declared that the knife had missed anything vital but had gone deep. Corbin's small cabin became a sickbed. Time was measured by the changing of bandages, the brewing of willow bark tea for the fever, and the slow return of color to his face. My, Liane, and Shio never left his side. They were fierce, tireless guardians of his recovery, their roles shifting dramatically from the rescued to the caretakers. In this crucible of shared vulnerability, the last of their walls crumbled. He was no longer just the strong, silent rescuer, and they were no longer fragile, helpless victims. They were a man and three women bound by a shared, bloody fight for survival. In the long, quiet nights, when the pain was worst, they would sit beside him on the narrow cot, their warm presence a comfort against the agony. It was in these dark hours that his own ghosts came for him. The war, which he had kept locked away in a dark cellar of his mind, broke free in his fevered dreams. He would cry out in his sleep, his body thrashing against phantom enemies. "Thomas," he would shout, his voice thick with an old, unhealed agony. "I'm coming, Thomas!" They did not try to wake him. Instead, they would lean close, their voices a lifeline in his sea of memory. "You are not there, Corbin," Mai would whisper, her hand on his forehead. "The war is over." "You are here with us," Liane would add, her voice soft and soothing. "You are in Wyoming." "You are safe," Shio would finish, describing the room around him, the pattern of the moonlight on the floor, the weight of the quilt, until the tension left his body and he would quiet, his hand often finding one of theirs in the darkness and clinging to it as if to an anchor. They were calming the ghosts that had haunted his solitude for a decade. His physical strength returned with agonizing slowness. One afternoon, he took his first few shuffling steps to the window, leaning on Mai and Shio for support. They stood there together, the three sisters and the man they had saved as surely as he had saved them, looking out at the lake, now calm and clear and blue. He looked at the women who had nursed him, who had fought for him, who had faced down his demons with nothing but the soft power of their voices. He saw not an intrusion, but his future, standing right there beside him. The thought of a life without their quiet strength, their gentle presence, was suddenly a cold, empty void he couldn't bear to contemplate. He had nothing to offer them but a broken past and this small patch of land, but it was all he had. "This place," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper, still weak from his ordeal. "It could be your home. If you'll have it." Tears welled in Mai's eyes. Xiao smiled, a fragile, beautiful thing. Lian, ever the most direct, answered his offer with a question of her own, the same one from that first terrifying night, but now stripped of all its shame and filled with a new, hopeful, and profound meaning. "Will you stay, Corbin?" He did not need to answer with words. He simply leaned his head and gently kissed Mai, then Lian, then Xiao, a gentle, reverent kiss of acceptance, of promise, of homecoming. He was finally home. They did not stay in the old cabin. Together, the four of them built a new home on a rise overlooking the lake, with a wide porch for watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. They built it with their own hands, Corbin's strength returning with each log he notched, their combined efforts a testament to the new life they were forging together. The seasons turned. Their life settled into a peaceful, hard-working rhythm, a tapestry woven from four disparate threads. One late summer afternoon, they rode out together along the lake shore, the horses moving at a gentle walk. As they rode, Mai's hand slipped from her reins and found his. A moment later, Lian's hand covered both of theirs, and finally Xiao's joined them, a simple, four-way gesture of belonging. He looked over at them, at their faces, which were no longer haunted by fear but were instead softened by love and lit by genuine, radiant smiles that reached their identical dark eyes. And in that moment, Corbin Hayes smiled back, a rare, true smile that reached his stormy eyes and seemed to erase the last shadows of the war, of the grief, of the crushing solitude. The pain they had all carried had not vanished. The ghosts of Thomas, of their father, of the lives they had lost, were still there. But now they rested quietly, held in the shared space between the four of them, their weight distributed, no longer a burden to be carried alone.